So after we went to press, so to speak, on yesterday's Morning Pitt, there was some recruiting news that came out. I'd already recorded a near half-hour podcast about Pitt's athletic director, Alan Green, what Pitt fans want to hear from him. So I wasn't going to necessarily undo that, and I thought it would give us a little bit of time to think about what we wanted to talk about with regards to Pitt's newest commitment. Demetrius McCrae, a wide receiver at the First Academy in Orlando, Florida. He's a wide receiver joining Pitt's recruiting class, the class of 2026, which means he is finishing up his junior year of high school now. He'll be a senior in the fall, and then if all goes well, sign with Pitt in December, if there's still a signing day then, and then enroll with the Panthers as a freshman in the 2026 season. That's a long ways from now. It's a year and a half from now, and as we all know, a lot can change in that time, but for now, we're going to talk about what Demetrius McCrae means for Pitt, what he means for the recruiting class, what he means for the roster, what he means for everything altogether, and the fact that this is an interesting little trend that's developing here in terms of pursuing wide receivers and rebuilding the wide receiver room, a room that I think even the coaches would admit needed a bit of renovation after the last few years. So let's talk about the state of Pitt's wide receiver room. Let's talk about these newest commitments, or the newest commitment, and what he brings to the recruiting class, the overall sort of situation with Pitt and wide receivers on the current roster, transfers, and incoming recruits. Let's talk receivers and recruiting here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Wednesday. It's the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, hanging out with you today, talking about all things Pitt sports, as we always do on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know what we always ask you to do, of course, like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. These daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show, which we'll have tonight at 8:30 p.m., with me and Jim Hammett, and your comments and questions is what we always look forward to, that back and forth, of course. We have post-game shows and press conferences and interviews and all kinds of things right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. The longest-running daily Pitt video podcast in the universe. Quite frankly, this might be the only daily Pitt video podcast in the universe. I haven't explored all the farthest reaches, but as far as I know, this is the only daily Pitt podcast or Pitt video podcast in the universe. So, I mean, what we're doing here is something very unique. Nobody else is doing it, right? And when I say we, I don't mean the royal we or the editorial we. I'm talking about all of us. We are involved in something very special here. But it's a chance to talk a little bit of Pitt sports every day, just catch up on whatever's going on. And if nothing's happening, we'll find something to talk about. You know, yesterday we talked about Pitt's athletic director and what the Panther fans need to hear from him or would like to hear from him. Far be it from us to insist on anything or demand anything. It's just what Pitt fans would want to hear, what questions they would want to ask of Alan Green. We talked about that because he released a video on Monday, and that was good inspiration. And then there was a commitment on Monday night, so that was good inspiration for today. Of course, you can get all the news on the athletic director, the athletic department, the recruiting, the commitments, all of those things at Panther-Lair.com. It's a Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network, where we have the best coverage of Pitt sports you are going to find. Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, transfers, everything going on in the world of Pitt sports, we covered at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards for Pitt fans to hang out with each other and interact and talk all day long. Good times had by all. All right, new commitment, Demetrius McCrae. He's a 6-foot, 180-pound wide receiver from the Orlando area, Central Florida area. Leesburg is his town, and he attends the First Academy in Orlando, a school that could have been 9-1 last fall, but it ended up being 0-10 due to a series of forfeits for violations. I think their head coach got suspended for a year. So, I mean, it's a bit of controversy there, but there's no question that they have some stud players. Lots of Power 4 prospects coming out of that school, and Demetrius McCrae certainly appears to be one. He committed to Pitt on Monday and chose the Panthers over an offer sheet that includes, just running through the Power 4 schools, Boston College, Illinois, Iowa State, Kansas State, Louisville, Mississippi State, North Carolina, Ole Miss, Purdue, UCF. Was there a couple more here? Wake Forest, West Virginia, a whole bunch of MAC schools and G5 schools. Pretty solid Power 4 offer sheet. Had an official visit scheduled to Pitt, has an official visit scheduled to Pitt. I think that's the only school that he had scheduled an official visit to, but obviously a very strong offer sheet and a very strong recruiting profile. Guess what? He's a 6 foot, probably 5'11 or 5'10 wide receiver from Florida. You can guess what word that is. You don't have to do the Wordle today. It's speed. S-P-E-E-D is the word with Demetrius McCrae, as it is with so many wide receiver recruits we see this staff targeting. Size, not as important as speed. And he certainly showed it off for the first academy last year. 36 catches, 894 yards, and 9 touchdowns in the 10 games that they played but didn't play. Averaged almost 25 yards per catch. That number jumps out to me. And it's not like he had 6 catches and he averaged 25 yards per catch. He had 36 receptions and averaged 24.8 yards per reception, almost a little over 111 yards per game. A playmaker, a wide receiver, and a guy who can catch the ball and take off. Pure speed, which again should sound familiar because that's what this staff goes after. And that was the book on the first wide receiver who committed in the class, Dylan Wester. Get ready for it. 5'9" from Sarasota. Another shorter but faster wide receiver from Florida. And it's been said a million times, take the speed, take the Florida guys. They've got the speed. You're going to get good players out of the state of Florida if you go there. And if you look hard enough, you will find the guys who are getting overlooked by the power conference schools. Pitt has been going to this well for more than a quarter century, at this point, or at least a quarter century at this point. I think they've tried to apply some of this logic to Georgia. I think they're starting to apply some of this logic to Texas. But they've been working this angle with Florida for a long time, that there are so many good players that the quote-unquote big schools, that Florida, Florida State, and Miami, not to mention the rest of the SEC, which recruits Florida, which recruits the state, those schools can't take all of them. There are so many good players in Florida, in the state, that those schools can't take them all. They don't have room for them all. They're not going to find them all. If you dig deep, if you've got the connections, if you can work it, you'll find those guys. And that's what they've done here with 2 commitments from the state of Florida here in this 2026 recruiting class. Pitt has 5 commitments so far. 2 of them are wide receivers from Florida. Dylan Wester, the other one, like I said, from Sarasota. He averaged almost 20 yards per catch last season. He had 37 catches for 675 yards and 6 touchdowns. His teammate is going to UCF, who actually, he had a few more catches than Dylan Wester did. But, that's the kind of talent and that's the kind of speed that you find on these teams, and that's what Pitt is looking for. What's interesting is, they've now got 2 commitments in the class from wide receivers, and there's no real indication that they intend to slow down. They still have 8 other wide receivers on the books for official visits in June. Now, I would wager that not all 8 of those guys will end up making those official visits. Obviously, not all 8 of those guys are takes right now. They very well, some of them could commit. A lot of them, probably couldn't, or at least would need to get to campus. I don't think Pitt is going to take 7 wide receivers in this class, but I think they aim to take more than 2, and I think that's evidenced by their recruiting efforts. And one of the commitments they have in the 2027 recruiting class, Jacob Thomas, another Florida receiver, is at that same position. It fits this same mold, and we're seeing. I know we want to talk about sort of the big picture with wide receivers, but we've talked about this with the skill players overall, skill position players, the offensive weapons overall, that we've seen Kade Bell has a type, but we've certainly seen it, it's emphasized at wide receiver. And you can look at the guys that they recruited in this year's recruiting class, the guys who were freshmen this year, Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates and Cameron Sapp. They're all sort of built the same way. You can look at, Kataris Hicks and Andy Jean and Raphael Williams and Sincere Lee. There's basically 4 out of the 5 wide receivers they've brought in as transfers since Kade Bell got here. They all sort of fit that same mold. Deuce Spann is the one exception. He's big. He's tall. Everybody else is sort of built the same. And they've got different skill sets and they can do different things. And, they're not all exactly the same guy, but they kind of look like they are. And that's okay. And I think Kade Bell would admit to you that he would say, look, I am much more interested in the guys who are fast. I am much more interested in the guys who can, turn their hips, who have that flexibility, the athleticism, And, that if we scheme it up right and we execute the play, we can get those guys the ball with an opportunity to take off for big gains. And so give me the speed, we'll get them the ball, and we'll let them make plays. And it's the Des Reed model. It's the, like I say, Bryce Yates and Tony Kinsler and Cam Sapp model. It's the Sincere Lee model, the Raphael Williams model. And then even with the transfers this year, Kateris Hicks, and Andy Jean, who's no longer here, who left for the transfer portal. I think he's going to Arkansas or someplace. So, and then you see it in this recruiting class with Dylan Wester and Demetrius McCrae. And, aside from the fact that these guys all share a lot of similar traits, I think what you're seeing is a full-blown rebuild of the wide receiver room. Why is that? Why do they need to rebuild the wide receiver room? Well, part of it might be the fact that they are currently projected to have 10 scholarship receivers on the roster this year, and only 3 of them, well, let's say that, okay, there's 10 scholarship receivers projected to be on the roster this year. 3 of them are freshmen, like incoming freshmen. Now, all 3 of them were here for spring camp, but of the 7 upperclassmen, only 3 were recruited to Pitt out of high school, and signed with Pitt out of high school. Kenny Johnson, Zion Fowler, and Tyreek Robinson. And that's it. You've got a lot of blank spaces from the last few recruiting classes. If you look at this year's 2025 season, conceivably you have 4 classes that should have players on this roster, should have wide receivers on this roster. The 2022 class should be in their 4th year this year. 23 should be in their 3rd year. 24, should be second year players, and then obviously the 2025 class is the true freshman. Let me look real quick. I do want to check the 2021. I went through and made a list of all the recruiting classes because this is the kind of thing I like to do. But I want to look at the 2021 recruiting class real quick and see what wide receivers were in that group, because I think it follows the trend, right? Miles Alston, gone to the transfer portal. Jaden Bradley, gone to the transfer portal. And that's it. So they signed 2 wide receivers that year. Both of them are gone to the transfer portal. That was the 2021 class. 2022 class, they signed 2 wide receivers, Che Wabuko and Addison Copeland. Where are those guys? Not on the roster. 2023, they signed 4 wide receivers. Kenny Johnson, hey, he's here. Zion Fowler, he's here. Even though there was a little bit of hiccup in his recruitment. Izzy Polk, he's gone. He's like at Akron or someplace. And Lamar Seymour, he's gone. He's at Bethune-Cookman? No, I forget where he went. But he went to the transfer portal. 2024 recruiting class. Last year's freshmen, they signed 2 wide receivers, Tyreek Robinson and Cameron Montero. Cam Montero, gone. Robinson's still here. So when you look at those 4 recruiting classes that conceivably could put wide receivers on this year's roster, all the way back to the 2021 class, where those guys will be redshirt seniors this year, to the 2022 class, those guys would be either true seniors or redshirt juniors. 2023 class, those guys would be juniors or redshirt sophomores. 2024, they would be sophomores or redshirt freshmen. That's 2, 4, 6, 10 wide receivers signed over the course of those 4 recruiting classes, and there's 3 of them left. 3 of them are still on the roster. And those 3 are Kenny Johnson, who is Kenny Johnson, expected to have a big year this year, and I think, should finally have that breakout season. There's Zion Fowler, who has made minimal contributions. He'll be a redshirt sophomore this year. And there's Tyreek Robinson, who saw playing time and did not redshirt last year as a true freshman. You would expect him to have a role this season, but we'll see. So not a lot in terms of the last 4 recruiting classes prior to this year's freshmen. You're not getting a lot of contributions out of those guys. And so you end up with this rebuild. And, the rebuild, I think, takes a few different forms. One, they signed 3 wide receivers in the freshman class. And this is more like a long-term thing. When you're talking about freshmen coming in, that's a long-term build. But, outside of basically the offensive line, that's as much. I think they signed 4 offensive linemen in this incoming freshman class. They signed 3 receivers. So pretty much O-line had the most scholarship spots allotted to it. Wide receivers were right up there, probably tied with a couple other spots, but as the second most scholarship spots allotted. Same thing with the transfer portal. They brought in 3 transfer wide receivers, Deuce Spann, Blue Hicks, and Andy Jean. Even if Jean is left, they brought in 3 guys. That's right up there with, the biggest needs this offseason from the portal, I think everyone agreed, were the offensive line and defensive line, particularly defensive end. And they brought in 3 offensive linemen, and they brought in 3 defensive ends, and the staff clearly, we all talked about how the lines, the offensive line and the defensive ends were the biggest priority. That's what they had to address the most. Clearly, the staff had the wide receiver position right up there with those other 2 because they brought in 3 receivers, just like they brought in 3 ends, and they brought in 3 offensive linemen. And so clearly the coaching staff saw this as a major need for rebuilding, and that's what they did through the portal and then through the recruiting class. And it seems like they intend to do it again in this 2026 recruiting class. I don't think they're going to stop with just 2 commitments. For one thing, they do need the numbers. They need to keep building it up. For another thing, you can't stop at 2 commitments because it's the classic thing. If you sat between these 2 guys, look to your left, look to your right. One of the people you just looked at won't be here on signing day. You sort of have to have have it built in to your your plans for the recruiting class that you're not going to hold on to everybody. You're going to lose some of these guys. And I think Dylan Wester and Demetrius McCrae both look really good. They look like they'd be a good fit for this offense. They're fast and all those things. But you can't assume they're all going to stick around. You're going to have some attrition there. It seems likely. You look over the past 3-4 years, decommitments are happening more and more in addition to what you're going to lose in the transfer portal. So we've seen a rebuilt room in the wide receiver room. And actually, if you look, they look at the 10 scholarship receivers they're projected to have for this season, 3 are incoming freshmen. So those guys were recruited by this staff. Kade Bell and J.J. Laster and those guys. And then, obviously, the 2 transfers who are still here, Deuce Spann and Blue Hicks, plus Raphael Williams and Sincere Lee. So 7 of the 10 scholarship receivers on this roster were brought in by we call them the new offensive staff. They've been here for more than a year, so I don't know if they're new anymore. But Kade Bell, J.J. Laster, and all those guys. They came in, 7 out of 10 were acquired in the last 2 years and acquired by this coaching staff. So in terms of building the receiver roster to reflect what they need and what they want, they've largely done that. Some positions it can take a little bit longer to rebuild, in your own image. The wide receivers, they've effectively done it pretty much, Kade Bell was hired in December of 23, right? So 12, 13, 14, about 17 months, less than 18 months, they've rebuilt the wide receiver room in their image. Now, it's still going to be led by that guy, Kenny Johnson. He's still going to be the number 1 wide receiver. He should be getting all the targets. But the numbers 2, 3, 4, and maybe 5 wide receivers this season in terms of receptions and yards and touchdowns, probably all going to be guys that this staff brought in because they felt like the room needed a rebuild, and they've effectively pulled it off. And I think they're going to keep going with this 2026 class to try to continue the rebuild. So, 1 wide receiver from Orlando commits on Monday night, and here we are on Wednesday talking for 20 minutes about how Pitt has rebuilt the wide receiver room. But that's what we do, right? And now you can walk around with a different perspective on the wide receiver room and maybe some numbers to throw around to impress your friends. Listen, if you want to impress your friends, make sure you tell them about the live stream tonight. 8:30 p.m. we'll be live right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Me, Jim Hammett, and you talking about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. We'll talk about the wide receivers and the latest from recruiting. We'll talk about the latest on the basketball transfer portal front and maybe recruiting front. We'll see if anything comes out there. And, anything else going on in Pitt sports, anything else you want to talk about in Pitt sports, we'll be here to do it right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like and subscribe and tune in tonight at 8:30. Check out the website Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt sports news. And thanks for tuning in today. I hope you've had a great week so far. I hope you enjoy your Wednesday and have a great day. We'll talk to you tonight on the live stream, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.